Once again, I'm Dr. Alvaro Gurovich. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Cardiopulmonary PT Journal. I'm also the chair of the Department of Physical Therapy and Movement Science at the University of Texas at El Paso. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to our two best reviewers for the journal, Dr. Christopher Brown and Dr. Paul Ricard. This is just as a matter of anecdote. Paul and I, we sit out by each other on our flight back from Anaheim in CSM, and we start talking, and this idea came up and say we can do this webinar to tell people or to introduce people to how to review a manuscript. And that's how it developed. And then we contacted Chris, that he's been twice the reviewer of the year for the journal, and it started taking form, and here we are. I hope we know what we're doing. We're going to do our best, and we're going to try to have some time at the end to answer any of your questions or questions that you might have. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. I have a little bit of a introduction. So, as I said, we have Chris Brown. Right now, he's a PhD candidate at Concordia University, and Paul Ricard, that is working the cardiac surgery PT in Johns Hopkins University. These are considered our top reviewers right now for the journal. They review for us anything between 8 to 10 manuscripts a year. Because of their level of expertise, our associate editors normally ask them. And the other thing, that they're very efficient. So I'm going to share a few things about how is the process, so we can understand what we're doing in the journal. The first few slides is just about the basic of peer review process. So feel free at the end to ask any question about these and these principles about peer review. As an outline for this first few slides, what is the scientific method, what it means, what does the peer review process mean, why it's important. Then we're going to talk about the peer review process, and then what it means being a reviewer. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that because we have Chris and Paul to do that. So the first guest speaker, I'm going to bring Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I'm going to share this video because he explained the scientific method like nobody else.
There was an incident in Pasadena, California. I was there. I don't drink much coffee. I don't have a relationship with caffeine. But every now and then I'll be delighted to have a nice cup of hot cocoa. And I went to one of these coffee houses, with the chalkboard out front. And so I had, the kind I'm talking about. They're all over Brooklyn. You trip on the chalkboards in Brooklyn. So I'm in there, I order hot chocolate. And I ordered it with whipped cream, of course, right? And it comes to the table, and there's no whipped cream. And I said, I ordered this with whipped cream. And they said, oh, we put it on. And I said, well, where is it? Oh, he said, it's sunk to the bottom. I then said, either the laws of physics that apply everywhere in the universe are suspended in your coffee shop, or you didn't put whipped cream on my hot cocoa. And he looked indignant.
Really?
Now, to his credit, rather than continue to argue with me, he intended to prove me wrong. Whoa. So he went into the kitchen, brought out the whipped cream, scooped it up, popped it in my hot cocoa, and it bobbed once and floated atop. And there it was.
Did you invite him?
Of course whipped cream has to float. Because, first of all, before it was whipped cream, it was cream, okay? And old-timers remember, what does cream do in unhomogenized milk? It floats to the top, and you skim off the cream, leaving behind skim milk, okay? This is how that works. Now you take the heavy cream and then whip it, putting air into it, it is not going to sink on any known liquid devised by man, okay? So,
All right.
So here's my point. The lesson there is,
Yes.
I'm a fan of the edict, if an argument lasts more than 5 minutes, then both sides are wrong. I think that applies maybe 85% of the time, but it's a good rule, it's a good tenet to carry with you. Now watch. This is how science works. One researcher comes up with a result, and that is not the truth. No. A scientific emergent truth is not the result of any one experiment. What has to happen is somebody else has to verify it. Preferably a competitor. Preferably someone who doesn't want you to be correct, such as my waiter. He went out to prove me wrong and got the same result that I had declared. We can call that the beginnings of an emergent truth about whipped cream. Now we need someone to do it in Asia and in Europe, and then you get a trend, and you can then declare that a consensus of observation and experiments has emerged in the scientific community. Whipped cream floats on hot chocolate.
And that waiter today is getting a PhD in buoyancy.
That's a really nice perspective on how to address science. Why journals exist not just because we want to publish things, but we want to bring important topics about discovery. And even though every researcher is always looking for being novel and try to be the first, it's okay if you're the second or the third, because you are supporting, or like Tyson was saying, even denying what other results were. So it's a great example in studying that why journals are important, because it's the venue where you're going to receive those manuscripts and you're going to have these discussions. And I get Chris and Paul and myself, we have review papers from people or from topics that we said, this is wrong. But then we need to give our more professional perspective to try to enhance the science. And many times, the ones that are proven wrong is us. So that is part of the process of doing science and finding this scientific consensus. On that end, data integrity, plagiarism, and honesty play a very important role. We assume that every researcher will use integrity on their results, integrity on their method. They're not going to be plagiarizing information, and they're going to be honest about what they find. And the peer review process is that is what the peer review process allow us to do, and to enhance that everybody's doing their fair share on these scientific discovery. So how's the peer review process? And this is a very nice schematic. It's not from our journal, but this is pretty much what it happened. Somebody submit a manuscript. I do initial screening as the editor-in-chief. I see if the format is okay, if the topic is okay, is aligned with the goals of the journal. Then I see if there is anything needed to go back. So sometimes I send it back to the author for revisions immediately. And sometimes I said, okay, now I want to send it to peer review. But before peer review, I send it to another editor, that is the associate editor. The associate editor makes a review a little further than the one that I do, and find the best reviewers for that specific manuscript. That's where Chris and Paul are being summoned by our associate editors. Then the reviewers send the comments to the editor. And the comment is not necessarily, yes, is acceptable for publication or not, are comments to the author. to make the author aware of some of the flaws or some of the details that that manuscript has. Then the editor sends a decision, and the decision can be three. Could be rejected because it doesn't really fall with the scope with the paper, or because we have a lot of submissions and we have limited space on a journal. The other decision is we send it back to the authors and say, hey, there was a lot of comments. Why don't you review the comments? And then we go back to the starting line with the peer review, or the manuscript can be accepted. Once the manuscript is accepted, it's ready for publication. And here is when you have the resubmission, the revision. And when you have a revision, sometimes the revision can go back to rejected, or the revision can go back to accepted. So there are two reviewers process, internal and external review. The internal review is editorial. I need to see that the paper is within the scope of the journal. And then there is this external peer review that is reviewed by external peers. We have several types of review. It can be open review, where the authors know who are the reviewers and the reviewers know who are the authors. The most common one is single blind, where the reviewers know the authors, but the authors do not know the reviewers. And the case of the CPTJ is double blind. The reviewers don't know the authors, and the authors don't know the reviewers. I think is the most fair review process. That is the double blind. So how you become a reviewer? You need to, everybody is welcome to be a reviewer for the journal, but only accept if you have time to review it. It normally takes between 4 and 6 hours. When you are a very expert reviewer, it might take you 3, but really not less than 3 hours to do a very thorough review. So you need to have the time to do it. Be mindful of your colleague, because it could be you. I remember having a very rough reviewer too, is always reviewer too. That was very tough with me, one of my first papers. And I found that, anybody that submit a manuscript has done an enormous job and work, and they have done a lot of work behind that submission. It's always good to treat those like colleagues, and that you don't want to give a very harsh comments. There are two. We're going to post these later on our YouTube channel with the links. There are two articles from the Advances in Physiology Education that are very good guidance for having, if you need something structured, this is really good guidance for how to review a paper. Step by step, what do you need to pay attention, and so forth. Now, we're going to get two different perspectives on how to review a paper. And I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Chris Brown.
All right, greetings. My name is Christopher Brown, and I do in fact do a fair amount of peer review for CPTJ. I do it in the spirit of hopefully guiding researchers into becoming better researchers. This particular presentation went through a lot of iterations, and I tried to make it as engaging as possible. I have a unique way that I do peer review. So my portion of this live webinar is entitled Passing Peer Review 10 Tests for Acceptance. When I submit my peer review commentary, I don't necessarily organize it by test. I use the formatting, of course, that's available. Rather, I use these tests as a guide to determine my conclusion of reject, revise, or accept. But I try to put myself in the shoes, so to speak, of the researcher. If I was designing their study, how would I pass my tests and produce a study that would be accepted? So I will share with you my peer review method and make a few critical points on how I believe you can increase your likelihood of acceptance. Along the way, there's going to be a few examples. They're not real examples. Some of them are a bit absurd, just to make a point. So I just want to make it clear these aren't actual peer reviews that have been done. All right, so let's get going. The difficult truth is most manuscripts are not rejected when they are submitted. They are rejected when the study was designed or even when it was conceptualized. By the time peer review happens, the study is already complete, and that means that some flaws are fixable and some are not. Revision means that there's still a chance of acceptance, and rejection often means there is a flaw that cannot be repaired because the opportunity to fix it has already passed. The most important advice I can give is start your own self peer review from day one until submission and ultimately the editor's decision. So just a quick note, this presentation focuses on interventional studies, but much of the content is applicable to observational studies, except for the content on causation. There's no specific qualitative study content or examples, but I think the general premises still apply. So we are in part one, building the study. We are now entering the construction phase, and we need to build a strong foundation for acceptance. So the first of my tests is called the receiving the baton test. Research is a never-ending relay race in which one receives the baton from prior researchers, and upon publishing their work, they then hand off the baton to the next research group. Every study inherits the strengths and weaknesses from prior work. Receiving the baton means more than just citing those prior studies. What it means is understanding what they established, where they fell short, and what they left unanswered. Not receiving the baton forces the reviewer to ask, why was this study done? Why did they choose this particular design? Why were these outcomes chosen? If the baton exchange is unclear, then the study may feel unnecessary, which is a very bad situation to be in as a researcher. So let's start with a faux CPTJ example here. So, and the question here is, did these authors appropriately build on prior work? A study that fails. A manuscript studies inspiratory muscle training in people with COPD using a fixed load of 30% maximal inspiratory pressure for 6 weeks, and they report modest improvements in dyspnea, but does not cite prior randomized controlled trials showing progressive loading greater than or equal to 50% of MIP is necessary. They also ignore evidence that non-progression leads to plateau by week 3 to 4. So the reviewer's reaction, this protocol appears outdated and does not reflect current evidence on IMT dosing. How about a study that might pass? Same topic, but the authors cite meta-analyses showing progressive IMT greater than or equal to 50 or 60% MIP improves outcomes. This study also identifies a gap in the literature, lack of data on adherence with home-based progression. So their design, weekly reassessment of MIP, load increased accordingly, remote monitoring via digital manometer, and the reviewer's reaction is that this study clearly builds on and advances prior IMT literature. So the receiving the baton test asks whether you inherited prior knowledge correctly. The jigsaw puzzle test, the second test I have, asks whether your study fits where you are trying to place it, or is it out of place? Does your study population align with prior work? Similarly, does how you constructed your study design align with past studies? Do your outcome measures have a relationship with prior studies? And perhaps most importantly, have you compared your results and conclusions with cited studies? Poor fit leads the reviewer to perceive the study as a dead end from a research standpoint and unable to change clinical practice. Good fit can immediately improve clinical care and offers a research pathway forward. When I review a study, my sincere hope is that the researchers have a demonstrable awareness of how their study aligns with prior work on their topic of interest. So then there is the so what test, and it is a critical test and one of the hardest to pass. The question is not, did you find something? The question is, did you find something that matters? Can clinicians do something differently tomorrow because of this study? Can researchers build the next study because of your work? If I'm asking the question, so what? the odds of rejection are already pretty high. It is revision at best. So let's get a quick faux CPTJ example. Reporting on the correlation between your novel exercise test and the current gold standard exercise test. So what? Why do we need this test? Is it more accessible to clinicians and patients in certain settings? Is it less resource demanding? Does it demonstrate strong external or ecological validity? There must be a good reason for you to be constructing a new measurement tool. Being novel isn't enough. This study should focus on why the novel test serves a purpose, not whether or not it is strongly correlated with the gold standard test. Context matters more than simply demonstrating an association between two variables. In fact, I highly recommend checking out a really fun website by a guy named Tyler Vigen on spurious correlations. Here are a couple of them. Did you know that the association between the popularity of the first name Eleanor and wind power generated in Poland is statistically significant at p less than 0.01 and has an R value of 0.993? Did you know that the association between Google searches for how to go to space and Chipotle Mexican Grill's stock price is statistically significant at p less than 0.01 with an R value of 0.961? Those are all very strong correlations, but obviously there is literally no legitimate relationship between these two sets of variables, yet the stats say there is. It highlights how critical context is when you discuss your results and attempt to answer the question, so what? Weak studies simply regurgitate results. Strong studies give context and explain impact. We move to the test, the who cares test, which is often not even a consideration by researchers, I have found, as it turns out. But I want people to think about this. Every study speaks to someone, but who is that someone? Who benefits from this knowledge? Who will use it? Should they trust it? And equally important, are you the right messenger to give that message? If not, did you collaborate with the right people? Audience clarity and messenger credibility are inseparable. So we move to part 2, proving the study. These are tests of rigor. This is where reviewers start to become skeptical. Most researchers perceive the term eligibility solely as participant recruitment, but eligibility should extend far beyond participant recruitment. Every decision in the study must qualify: the research question, the literature review, the outcomes of interest, the intervention, the analytical model, the measurement timing. A study is only as eligible as its weakest component. So I took another faux CPTJ example. This one's particularly absurd, but still gets the point driven home. So their research question was, do daily quadriceps leg extensions make people with COPD feel better? Their lit review cited 3 textbook chapters from the 1990s and 2 non-peer-reviewed fitness blogs about leg workouts. Their study design was a single group pre-test, post-test design with no control or comparison group, using a convenient sample of 5 participants from a solitary clinic. The measurement tool, an uncalibrated consumer-grade wearable to track heart rate. The outcome, asking the participants to rate their breathing on a scale of 1 to 5, and no, it wasn't a Borg scale. The intervention, 10 unweighted leg extensions 1 time a day, unsupervised, at home, when they remember to do it. The time points, immediately before the very first leg extension and immediately after the final leg extension. The analytical model, independent t-test to compare day 1 and day 3 averages, and not doing a sensitivity analysis when they discarded the data for 2 participants that dropped out of the study because they were too tired. Is any of this acceptable? No. Could a study be done on the effects, let's say, of progressive resistance training on quality of life in people with stable COPD and no exercise history? Yes, but each of these categories would have to be addressed much better and meet the eligibility criteria to be utilized in their study. Next is the prove it test. First, a little history. I think this is a really interesting story, a name you may never have heard of before, Sir Austin Bradford Hill, researcher known for the first randomized control trial in 1948 on the effects of streptomycin on treating tuberculosis. He himself contracted TB while a pilot in World War I, which changed his career path from being a medical doctor to that of a medical statistician and researcher. He was also one of the researchers that identified the link between tobacco smoking and lung cancer in the 1950s. But many say his greatest contribution was identifying 9 criteria for at least attempting to establish causation, which are itemized here on the slide. There's no need for me to verbatim read them to you. Rather, the point that needs to be made is that it is all too often when I read a manuscript that authors are too quickly, either explicitly or tacitly, and often inadvertently, suggesting causal relationships. In order to do so, you really need to meet these criteria to some degree. So how do these criteria help researchers pass peer review? You must do the work to draw a conclusion from your study. The work starts at study conception and design. If you draw conclusions in your study, you must be clear what you are communicating. If you infer a causal relationship, you will have to defend it. If you can't, revision is probably the best case scenario for you. If you miss the opportunity to establish a causal relationship, then the impact of your study is unnecessarily reduced. If it is only an association, then say that and explain why there is no causal relationship. Or perhaps you were unable to demonstrate one with your study, which might be the foundation for a future study. So the missing ingredient test is usually obvious, I think, to reviewers. The study just doesn't taste right. Studies are often not rejected because everything is wrong. They are rejected because something essential is missing. So I picked out 5 of the most common missing ingredients. First, sample size justification. The risks of under and oversampling, and how do we justify oversampling to address the risk of attrition? When we undersample, it is an underpowered study and an increase in the risk of a type 2 error. Essentially, you deceived yourself into believing there is no effect, thus no support for your intervention. You oversample and overpower your study, and minute clinically meaningless differences present as statistically significant, which is often misinterpreted as clinically significant. Strong recommendation, do an a priori power analysis. G-Power is downloadable from the internet and is free. Second, the primary outcome being identified. To not do so usually leads to p-hacking, and that increases your type 1 error. The primary outcome dictates the statistical power and sample size estimate, so expect an inflated type 1 error if you post hoc change your primary outcome measure. More practically speaking, the audience perceives the intervention is more effective than it really is. Intervention dose, not reported, and it is impossible to replicate in future research, and certainly in the clinic. Is it safe? Is it effective? Who knows? Fail to report dosing, and there is no opportunity to interpret whether the intervention caused the outcome, nor why. Another problem is no differentiation between the prescribed dose and the delivered dose because of a lack of details. This means that what you wanted the participants to do was different than what they did, thus confounding the results. And that word confounding should always be in your mind when you are a researcher. Missing data strategy. Data is rarely missing completely at random. We're missing at random, which is the situation where missing data are related to variables in the model, but just not the missing data. There's usually a reason, though, why there's missing data, which is missing not at random. The missingness is directly related to the missing data itself. And complete case analysis can bias the results by including either those that did well and stayed in the program or got bored and left, and those that did poorly and either dropped out because it was too hard or stayed in because they were benefiting from the intervention more than expected. Post hoc manipulation of missing data, which is known as p-hacking, more on that term in a bit, invites a severely inflated type 1 error to suggest that the sample or group did much better than they really did. But simply losing participant data in and of itself can lead to a type 2 error and lost power. Post hoc data manipulation or p-hacking is considered academic fraud. It's not a good thing to do. Part 3, surviving revision and considering the human factors, trust, clarity, and persuasion. Next is the disclosure test. Revision is your chance to take the truth serum, to tell the good, tell the bad, and tell the ugly. What changed? What failed? What limitations occurred? This is seemingly bad news. It really isn't. It just feels that way if you're the researcher. But if you don't disclose it, reviewers will notice. Be honest, disclose unfavorable findings, disclose deviations, disclose limitations. Otherwise, the reviewer brings out the lie detector in the revision decision commentary. And once trust declines, the review changes. It becomes more investigative. Not reporting your study accurately has many powerful downstream effects. Lack of findings not reported accurately keeps a dead-end research or clinical pathway open, and it also distracts from exploring a new research or clinical pathway that may have benefit. So p-hacking has been mentioned a few times, and it is a problem. P-hacking is the misuse of data analysis techniques to manipulate data until statistically non-significant results magically become statistically significant, typically at p is less than 0.05. And so the origin of the whole p is less than 0.05 was a historical accident involving two prominent statisticians at the time, Carl Pearson and Sir Ronald Fisher, who had a copyright dispute on some statistical tables on p-values. It turns out there is literally no scholarly basis whatsoever for p is less than 0.05. It is tradition, not science. What does a p-value really mean? It is the probability of finding a difference as large or larger with the assumption of a null hypothesis of no difference. How prevalent is p-hacking across a variety of fields? The prevalence across many applied and basic science research journals, the prevalence is an estimated 83%. Largely due to many factors: changing analysis after trial registry, publication bias for having p is less than 0.05, which drives this a lot, and against p is greater than 0.05, selective reporting by researchers, and post-randomization bias. It is often found because of journals having abnormally positive result rates. In PT research, we tend to have a positive result rate of about 83%. You would think it would be closer to a coin flip, that you would have some studies that are published that are not going to have positive results, but may be meaningful, and vice versa. The advice is very strong. Do not engage in p-hacking. It is a distraction. Rather, report p-values, report confidence intervals, and effect sizes. That your statistical test says no difference might actually be valuable, but we won't know that if you attempt to deceive us through p-hacking. The Feynman technique, which I use as a test, is named after Richard Feynman, the 1965 Nobel laureate in physics. Feynman, who was quite an amazing scientist, believed that if you could truly understand something, you should be able to explain it simply, so clearly that someone else could understand it and even teach it back. This test is about understanding, not persuasion. Can you explain your study in simple terms, showing that you understand it deeply? Can you explain it to a layperson? Or as Feynman once asked, can you explain it to your grandmother? If the manuscript is unnecessarily complicated, reviewers lose confidence. Clarity, not complexity, is sophistication. A faux CPTJ example might be a situation where a methods section is overloaded with advanced modeling terminology without any clear rationale. And then there's the elevator pitch test, which is a bit different. This is about the distillation of otherwise complicated and unfamiliar content to a digestible product that members of the public might benefit from. Can you reduce your study to its essential message in 30 seconds? Who benefits? What did you find? How did the story turn out? And so what? If you start with methods when you're giving this type of explanation, you are already stuck down in the weeds. So a couple of faux CPTJ examples. First, a bad elevator pitch. We used a linear mixed model with multiple imputation of 20 rounds. How about a good elevator pitch? We tested whether home-based inspiratory muscle training improved exercise tolerance in COPD. This test is useful for busy peer reviewers. You can help them better understand your study by you being able to pass the elevator pitch test before you submit the manuscript. Do not overemphasize methods, rather emphasize meaning. If your study cannot survive simplification, it probably lacks conceptual clarity. So then there's the reviewer's decision. Did I pass the tests, reject, revise, or accept? This is where all 10 tests converge. Every reviewer is making one of three decisions on their recommendation. That's reject, revise, or accept. Reject means there is a fatal flaw. Revise means there is still promise. Accept means the science is sufficiently defensible, not perfect, but defensible. That is the threshold that researchers should aim for. Acceptance, you pass the tests, a successful defense of your study. Acceptance is not proof of truth or flawlessness. Science is progress, not perfection. It is proof of sufficient rigor, credibility, and interpretability. And we must remind ourselves that science is provisional. Acceptance simply means your study earned its place in the conversation, and that is enough. We move to the final challenge. Don't wait until revision or rejection. Be your own peer reviewer. The final challenge before submission, become your own reviewer and ask yourself, would I reject this? Would I revise this? Would I accept it? And be honest, because the earlier you ask those questions, the greater your chance of acceptance. Be harder on your own study than the reviewer will be. That is how you improve your chance of acceptance. The final challenge you have to ask is, if you reviewed your own study today, would you recommend rejection, revision, or acceptance? These are 2 pages. The last 2 pages here are some references you might find useful, things that I referenced. And thank you very much for watching my presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Before I pass the baton to Paul, I'm gonna post on the chat the 2 references that I gave you on my presentation, but we're gonna have all the PowerPoints as a PDF uploaded on YouTube. So, but in the meantime, I want to leave you the 2 references that I gave. So, go ahead, Paul.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, my name is Paul Ricard, and I've been, I guess, reviewing articles for quite a number of years here, and I appreciate going after Chris, in part because he put into words that you, and with the evidence there, a lot of the things that I am doing. And I came about sort of as a backdoor approach. I really appreciate everything that he said with all those words, and the things I had to say as I looked at my notes were, wow, he put it into a lot of scientific words that I can bite my teeth into, which I like. So I came upon a lot of reviewing primarily by asking questions. So a lot of it was reading the literature that was out there, and so my take on a lot of this is that you can do more in reviewing a manuscript, or I do more in reviewing a manuscript, by just reading more research articles, but not just reading them, I then discuss them. And I had an opportunity when I first started working to work with Larry Cahalan and Sean Collins and Conrad Diaz. Those were the people that I worked with every day. And we used to have fun. We used to go out to the coffee shop or we out to the bar and we'd sit down and talk about research articles, which kind of sounds nerdy, but it's really fun. And we would talk about why was this good? Why was this bad? What do you have questions about? And I think that would be a recommendation to anyone out there getting into the research, doing their own, or then looking at those journal articles and is talking with people that are smarter than you. And clearly, the people here that I'm presenting with are, I feel, smarter than me, and which is great, and I get to learn from them as we go through this. And so when I get an article, I'm looking at what I know of the current literature. So I do usually give the cardiopulmonary research year in review. I use that as an opportunity to call and look at a lot of the research that's out there with my colleagues. I have an opportunity to discuss it with my co-presenters. But then I'm looking at those questions. So when I get that journal article to review, I'm looking at it and does it fit in with the rest of the literature that I'm aware of? And I'll generally read through the article first and just skim it. I'll read the entire thing through maybe a couple of times, and I sort of digest it and think about, does this make sense? Does this fit in all the other evidence that is out there? And does it match it? Is it saying something new? Is it totally something? Is this something I haven't read before? In which case, sometimes I'll go back and I'll look up a couple of references. I'll say, huh, what else is out there on this? And if I'm not 100% familiar with this topic, I'll go out there and see what else is out there in the literature. Does this seem to match it? Is it something new? Or is it refuting the evidence that I'm aware of out there? And I agree. I think that I like the fact that there are people out there refuting the evidence or finding things that don't have value in it, and that's equally as valuable as finding something. Oh my God, that's really important. This has a great p-value to it. And then I'm looking at this piece. Is it readable? Can others understand this? And actually, I had an opportunity, I think, to work with Chris on a review recently, and I read through this and I was like, wow, I think this is a great manuscript that we were reading through, and then reading the other reviewers' reactions to that and being able to go through it and go, oh, I agree. I see this doesn't make sense in how this was constructed. And you taught a lot of Chris's presentation of that, how you're constructing it, how you're building the evidence for people to be able to read this piece. It should be concise. It should be something that I'm reading through and I can understand this. I can easily explain it to a novel researcher, a novel clinician, as they're being able to go through this. When I'm looking at research articles or even doing the peer review process, I'm looking at this and saying, does this have impact to our readership? And as I do with the research year interview, I'm making this very broad. So I'm thinking that this could be something down to the cellular level. This could be something up to the systems level at a hospital level that you're doing things at. So I try to think that as broad as I can because I think that our readership does benefit from that piece. And then I'm looking at things like, does this bridge the gap? Does this bridge a gap between something that you might have been taught in school and or what's happening in clinical practice? And does this make it easier for people to advance what they're doing in their day-to-day practice? And this could be something, whether it be tests that they're using, an outcome measure that we're looking at for our patients, whether that be guiding people towards clinical recommendations, whether it be, again, guiding departments towards to how they're allocating resources, those kind of things in there. So I am probably more succinct in terms of a very short part of this overall presentation in terms of the contributing factors to it. Like I said, Chris's presentation did a wonderful job at really articulating those concepts and putting labels on them, and I really enjoyed the labels piece of that. Like I said, I am reading this a lot of the time as that clinician. I try not to sometimes get into the statistics, although there has been some times as I'm reading this, I'm like, this doesn't make sense with the statistics. So I'll even go down the road of, can you actually apply these statistics to the study as the way it was? And so I'll try to do that due diligence and And I think, like I was saying, this can take several hours when I'm looking back at the evidence as it exists and trying to compare it. And then, yes, giving the feedback to the authors. I too have had a couple articles that papers that I submitted, and people can be very blunt in their reviews to it. And I try when I'm giving this not only to be fair to them and making sure that I'm giving examples. So if I'm giving a critique to someone, I'm also trying to give that example of here's the evidence and here's why, or you had this question, maybe this article is actually better to make your argument for it, or this is interesting that you put it this way. These are some other articles out there that seem to contradict this. Can you explain this better? Because as a person that's reading this and digesting this, I want to know that how it applies to the literature that's also out there for that piece. And so my part, I think, is rather brief, and I also know that we're coming up on the 10-minute mark for people to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Phil. I mean, I completely agree with you. Chris' presentation was really good to put the scientific words and the things that sometimes we do organically, I would say, but it was very well put together on the systematization of the process, and I think that that's absolutely well received. Uh, Please, any question that you might have about the topic, about the publishing process, about the CPTJ. Uh, David Gonzalez came in. He's our media editor for the journal. And you can ask him questions too about our podcast and our videos, etc. So please take that opportunity.
Hello, thank you all for your presentation. It was so insightful, and it's nice to see the systematic part because then you can see where your paper fits in or your methods and can kind of break it down. So very, very appreciated. One of the questions that I have as I thought about with this is length. Oftentimes we're directed at different lengths for papers or how much details to provide or not. So working where I'm a PhD candidate too of writing a lot, do you have any tips of choosing the appropriate length or what you would recommend for that?
I'm gonna give you the editor-in-chief perspective. Right now, we're dealing with a good problem that we're having enough submissions and enough acceptances to fill two journals, not one. So we need to try to keep less pages because every extra page costs to the academy. So I'm being a little bit of the traffic control and seeing, okay, how we can make the papers the right length to be completely understandable without cutting important pieces, and helping the authors navigating that piece. So our latest instruction for authors have some recommendations on terms of length. How many words for original research versus a systematic review versus a clinical case, etc. Now, the length it depends, and I know that that's the most hated answer in PT world. But I can tell you that a rule of thumb, it's thinking on a manuscript that is double spaced. The introduction shouldn't be more longer than 2 pages. The methods need to be detailed enough that somebody in China can replicate it. So that's why the methods, you don't want to put a space on the methods because you need to be detailed enough that somebody can replicate it anywhere in the world. Then results, ideally not to be repetitive. So if you have a table with all the numbers, why you want to have a figure now that is repeating the same numbers? So you can either choose which one are going to go in a figure and which one are going to go in a table, but you don't want to have both. And if you have a table, you don't want to rewrite the average and standard deviations on the narrative of every single result that you have. So there you can you can save some space on the results. And the last rule of thumb that I have, at least with my PhD students, is that, and that's where they struggle, for every page that you have in your introduction, you should have 3 pages of discussion. So if you wrote 2 pages of introduction because your topic is complex enough that you need more space, the expectation is that you're going to go back to everything that you said in introduction and you're going to triple. And why triple? Because one, you want to be more specific about the things that you talk about in the introduction. Second, you want to link them to your results. So that's another page per topic. And then you want to link it to other people doing exactly the same. So that is why the ratio 1 to 3 is a good ratio. Now, could be 1 to 2, could be 1 to 4. It depends on the topic. But in general, I will keep it no more than 2 in introduction, uh, detailed enough to be replicated in the methods, do not replicate results, and 3 pages of discussion for every page of introduction. I don't know if anyone wants to add something.
Yeah, I could add real quick. I think the typical JAMA article gives about 2 or 3 sentences for an introduction in some cases. So they've really got to get to the point. Abraham Lincoln was once asked by a journalist because he was very tall how long a man's legs should be, and he had a great response, long enough to reach the ground. So, I think you have to really think practically about what you're going to put into a section. Um, I can tell you that sometimes I have received manuscripts and I'm going several pages here on the introduction. And the problem is the more you speak, I think a good lawyer would tell you is the more you speak, the more likely you are to incriminate yourself. So, at a certain point, you remember you're in some way you're promoting your work here. You're trying to basically say, "Hey, I got something good here." And, you have to be a little bit strategic. It's their job to try to refute your work, not your own job to refute your work. I mean, as long as you're being honest in your presentation, let them try to figure out what the issues are. You just make a good faith effort to report what you attempted to do and how it turned out.
I would echo all that. I think it's just being succinct with it. I think if you can get away with 1 sentence as opposed to 3, I've had the best. I don't know if you're having people review. I mean, obviously you have, I guess, co-authors, but if you have that person that's going to review it to cut it down to the most succinct words you can or the shortest version that you can. And I agree with what Chris is saying. A lot of the articles that I'm reviewing, I'm looking at and going, "Oh, you tried to explain way too much, and that doesn't apply. It should just be one should follow the other. This is why these are the things that are out there. Why I did the research? These are the methods. That's comparison." And Al's comment that the 2 to 4 things per for the discussion piece.
And I will add that when I said it depends, is of course depend on the study design and the thing that you want to prove on your study. Because on JAMA or Nature or all those very molecular studies that they're doing as a one experiment to prove one receptor, you don't need a page of introduction. I mean, half a page is enough. But if you want to link the 3 clinical outcome measures with 2 physiological outcomes, plus an intervention that is being proven here but not there, there you have 2 pages, a page and a half. So of course is depend on how you want to tell the story and what is your study design and the final out. Any other question? We still have 2 minutes. That's a long time.
Didn't get to ask. I didn't know if people had expectations of what did you hope to hear on here? Like what prompted you to come to this? This is not a topic everyone gets, drinks beer and coffee over and talks about articles, but we had quite a few people here. What were you looking for?
We have some people in the feedback survey saying that they would like a separate webinar on how to review published articles. I thought that was really neat.
So sort of a journal club or something. What you were
Yeah, yeah,
saying,
yeah.
Paul, that the bar thing. Yeah, yeah, could be.
And honestly, that's one of the things. Again, I got started with. I did a bathroom learning series. I put up articles in the bathroom and at work. Some people avoided the bathroom, but that's okay. Some people then discussed more of the articles with me. So I think that's just
I think for me, sort of new to this space and submitted my first manuscript, but it seemed just quite intimidating, right? And so trying to make sure that you're hitting the things that you think you're supposed to be hitting, and so that's what prompted me coming tonight was sort of like, okay, maybe I can find some clarity in what is exactly expected or what someone is looking for or finds meaningful. So very helpful. Thank you.
So I hope we are not intimidating you now. So it's like we're welcoming your work.
Yes, too many of the peer to reviewer memes, right? I've seen too many now.
Well, if I could add something real quick, um, I was a basic science researcher for a very long time in my previous career, and I will tell you, it's so intimidating in some of those places, and people will, if you stand in their way, they'll push you out of the way. They're so busy, and you have to earn your way. And I remember the first time that I did a talk in front of about 20 MD PhD fellows. There was a part of me that really wanted to just run out the door because I was like, wow, okay, the pressure's on. Probably wasn't my best presentation, but at least I got out of the way. But along the way, I found a lot of mentors, and I think that's the key. Like anything else in life, it helps because it's one thing to go to a textbook or to an article, but when you have a researcher that is willing to give you some time and tell you how it really is on the shop floor, so to speak, that's invaluable. You can't recreate that any other way because it's interactive and you get to see how they go about things, their habits and things like that, and a lot of the little stuff that you probably wouldn't necessarily get. So I would say to anybody interested in research, find an experienced researcher that would be willing to mentor you. And you will save you a lot of heartache, I will tell you, because when you're a novice at this and you start writing and then you look and you're like 20 pages in and you're trying to figure out where am I now and everything like that. I think having the gestalt thinking and the insight of experienced researchers, I don't think there's any way to be successful in this without finding somebody that's willing to give you that time. And then you get to give back someday, maybe when you're the big shot researcher and you give your time to somebody else that's coming along. And that if it works that way, then everybody benefits. And I think I think we have so much potential as physical therapists. I think we're still moving forward, and I think we've got great things ahead of us. So stick with it because we need good research and good researchers.
Okay. Well, 7:03 here in the mountains. Thank you very much to our presenters. Thank you very much for the attendees. I think it was a great success. The
Feedback is
comments,
reflecting it.
they just share the comments for you. I think, yes, there are room for improvement, and we're going to start figuring out what is going to be our next webinar. Just to give you, I mean, to keep you, what is it called, invited to go to our YouTube channel because we have a lot of videos there about special issues, how to develop a good manuscript, how to develop a good manuscript for methods and protocols. We have one webinar coming in for case studies also. So anyway, we'll keep you posted with other events that we will have. So thank you very much. Dave, anything to say?
It looks like the consensus is that everyone enjoyed the presentation very much. So I'd just like to thank the presenters, Chris and Paul. Thank you so much for presenting. You did a great job and hope to see you all again soon.